What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. So I want to make a video, and hopefully this helps you guys out if you're looking to buy an F30 340i or F30 335i. And I kind of want to fill you guys in on why I chose the 340i over the 335i and go over some of the differences that the chassis have and go over the differences of the engine, and kind of to fill you guys in. The main reason I went and looked for a 340i instead of a 335i was basically some of the engine differences that and the improvements that the 345i has. Now, that's not to say that the 335i and the N55 engine is a bad engine. I'm not saying that at all, because the N55 engine is very good, and the same thing with the F30 chassis in the 2015 335i. But I want to go over the subtle differences, and this might help you choose what direction you want to go. But let's get into why I chose the 340i over the 335i. So starting with the chassis, from the pre-LCI 335i to the LCI 2016 340i, there were some complaints about body roll for the pre-LCI chassis, and BMW moving into the LCI model, so the 2016 340i, they adjusted the camber, the toe, and the caster of the chassis, and they also added I believe 2 or 3 more mounting points just to stiffen up the chassis. And from that, the 340i generally has less body roll than the 335i. And so in turn, that, and you guys have probably heard a lot of people saying that the 340i chassis is a little more responsive. Now, is that due to the updated steering rack, or is it due to those chassis modifications? You know, who knows? But at the end of the day, are you really going to notice those differences from the pre-LCI F30 to the LCI F30? Honestly, I don't think you are going to tell a difference. But if we're gonna get down into the nitty-gritty, the 340i chassis, the LCI chassis, has a few updates to improve the body roll, so less body roll. And that did play a part in my decision to get the 340i over the 335i, but honestly, that wasn't the reason why I went the 340 route. But it was kind of a nice thing to know that, you know, they made improvements on that LCI chassis. So that was, you know, helped with my decision on which chassis or car to get. Now, moving into, as I mentioned, the LCI chassis. So with the LCI chassis, you get updated headlights, you get updated taillights, you get the updated iDrive function in the car, and you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube with someone that has a 340 or a 335i pre-LCI doing the LCI headlights, taillights, and updating the infotainment system with the new iDrive, the bigger screen. But you know, that's the nice thing, you can update those things. And yeah, they're gonna cost, you know, money down the road, but if you're looking to get a 335i but you want those LCI taillights, headlights, the infotainment system, you can get those. So that didn't really play a big part in making a decision, but it's just a nice thing that the 340i has updated parts which is nice, so you don't have to go around trying to find those LCI parts. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you're looking, because those parts can add up. I mean, headlights and taillights alone, that can easily be, you know, $2,000, you know, if you're getting brand new parts, which I would recommend. But you can certainly find good used parts, but you know, it's gonna cost you. And then now that money is going to the LCI parts instead of going to, you know, downpipe, springs, or, you know, other fun modification. And before I go any further, you know, I want to talk about price. So obviously the 3035i is going to be a little bit less expensive than the 340i. So when I was looking for my 340i, I mean, the prices ranged from $26,000 all the way up to $35,000. So, you know, I was kind of somewhere in the middle. I wanted lower miles, but, and I didn't want a car that was modified. And it's kind of hard to find a 340i that doesn't have a lot of miles. Mine's a 2016, and so for the year of the car, it has 30,000 miles. That's pretty low, so I feel like I got a great deal and a great car. But you can get a really nice 340i, but you know, you're going to pay upwards of $30,000 or more. Whereas if you're looking for a, you know, if your price range is $25,000 or below, you can certainly find a really good F30 335i below $25,000. When I was looking, I found one in Washington. It was very, very nice, but you know, just my gut kind of told me, you know, hold out for a 340i. And so I ended up holding out, but you know, you can find great deals for a 335i. And if the price is low enough, I probably would have went with a 335i. If I got a really good deal and it was a good car, I probably would have went with a 335i. But you know, I kind of held out, and then a good 340i popped up, and so I was able to do that. But you know, with the prices, you know, if you get a 340i, you're gonna get, you know, an updated car with updated LCI parts, you know, updated engine. 335i, you know, it's gonna be obviously an older model, pre-LCI parts, so you're gonna have to source those if you want those. But you know, you can get a really good deal. And again, the N55 engines are no joke. They are a really good engine. So, you know, I would say if you find a really good deal on a 335i, I would definitely, you know, consider that. But if you can spend a little more cash and get the 340i, and you know, I paid a little bit more money, but I got what I wanted. So, but there's really no wrong way to go. I mean, both of them are great cars, great engines, but you know, it all comes down to what you want and what is important to you. All right, so let's get down to the engine. So the 3035i has the N55, the 340i has the B58. One of the most important factors for me choosing the 340i was the engine, and that's really what it came down to. And as I'm sure you guys have heard, the 335i, the N55 engine, is a open deck engine, whereas the B58 is a closed deck engine. So what does that mean? It really means that the B58 engine is a little bit stronger. And the reason for that is, the reason that the B58 is stronger than the N55 is a couple of reasons, but the main reason is the B58 is a closed deck, N55 is an open deck. And what that means is there's coolant channels that are, so you have the block and then you have the cylinders. Well, between the block and the cylinders, there's coolant pathways. What that does is it takes material out of the block, therefore it weakens the block. And it can still handle a lot of power, but it weakens the block. But the advantage to that is it has better cooling capabilities. So that's kind of the advantage of an open deck, is that it has better cooling capabilities. The closed deck, it is just a solid block, and that makes it a lot stronger. The other key differences to the B58 engine it has forged internals. So the B58 has a forged crankshaft, forged piston rods, and that right there makes the B58 a lot more robust than the N55, because the N55 has a cast crankshaft and cast piston rods. So that played a big part in my decision, because I knew I wanted to tune my car and modified my car. I wanted to take it to the track. And when I found that out, I was like, okay, if this engine has forged internals and I maintain this engine could, last forever, knock on wood. But that was one of the main reasons. Also, looking into both engines, N55 has a intercooler, whereas the B58 has a air to water pendulum, so it does not have an intercooler. So what that means is the air to water intercooler can manage the air intake temperatures a lot better, especially when it's hot out, and therefore the car is gonna have more consistent, reliable power. And not to say that an intercooler setup like the N55 has is bad, but those systems are still capable of a ton of power. But as you've probably seen, a lot of very fast cars on YouTube have the air to water intercooler, and there's a good reason for that. And they can control the air intake temps a lot better than air-to-air intercooler. So the other two key differences from the N55 and the B58 engines are the stroke and the turbo. So, and the compression. So you've probably heard on forums that the B58 has a more linear power band than the N55. The N55 is more of, it hits up top a little bit harder than the B58. And there's a reason for that. So the B58 has a bigger turbo, and the turbine wheel is 6% larger than the turbo on the N55, and the compressor wheel diameter of the turbo on the B58 is 10% larger than the N55 turbo. So that means that the turbo can create more boost, make more power. Also, another key difference, and this is kind of what adds to the B58 linear power band, is that the B58 actually has a little bit higher compression than the N55 engine. And in turn, that makes the engine spool a little bit quicker than the N55. And not to say that the N55 engine has bad turbo lag, I'm not saying that at all, but the B58 is a little bit more responsive, because I've driven both. B58 is a little bit more responsive than the N55. Now, is it a huge difference? It's not huge. Maybe you'll see a bigger difference when the cars are tuned. I'm sure that because the compression's a little bit higher in the B58, you'll probably feel that a little bit more when let's say you have a stage 2 tune on both. The B58 is probably gonna get up to, higher speeds a little bit quicker just because of that. But, honestly, are you really gonna be able to tell in everyday driving? Probably not. But the people that on forums that have kind of said what the power band feels like for both engines. Definitely the B58's a little more responsive and the power band's a little bit more linear. And lastly, the one thing I'm going to touch on is the stroke of the B58. So the stroke of the B58 engine compared to the N55 engine, the stroke is extended by 5 millimeters, which doesn't seem like a lot, but the bore diameter of the engine is 2 millimeters smaller than the N55. And so the reason that they did that is if the bore is too big, then the block has to be a little bit longer. So the B58, they want to keep that engine block short so it's not too long, so they made the bore a little bit smaller. And how you keep the displacement is just adding a little bit more stroke to the engines. Both engines are 3.0 liters, so not much difference there, but really where you're getting a lot of gains on the B58 is the bigger turbo and the higher compression of the engine. Okay, so some of the positive and negatives of each engine. One of the things that did play a big part in my decision, and it was a little worrisome, but the 340i, the Vanos system is on the back of the engine. And from what I've heard, when the B58 needs to have a Vanos service, I've read a couple things that the engine needs to come out, which that seems kind of crazy to me, and I'm not sure, maybe you guys can fill me in the comments below. But that is one thing that I have heard, is if you have to have your Vanos system serviced on your B58 engine, they might have to take the engine out, because especially for the 340i, that engine is tucked all the way back into the firewall. So use good gas, use full synthetic oil, and make sure you are changing your oil regularly, because what messes up those Vanos systems is when you have old or bad engine oil. That oil, the carbon deposits will clog up the Vanos system, and that's when you get issues. So always make sure that you're changing your oil regularly with the 340i. And really any car, but especially with BMWs and those Vanos systems, you don't want to get those systems gunked up with bad oil. So always use good oil. The other thing too with the B58 is it has a mechanical water pump. So I don't have to really worry about electronic water pump failing. Whereas the N55, that engine has an electronic water pump, and that does fail. It's not if it fails, it's when it fails. So that was the one thing that I really didn't like about the N55 engine, was it was one of those things where it will happen. And as far as I've researched and heard, the B58 hasn't had an issue like that. So that was kind of one more thing to sway me over to the 340i. Now, getting to the power numbers, the N55 has 300 horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque, whereas the B58 has 320 horsepower and 330 foot-pounds of torque. So right out of the gate, the B58 is making a little bit more power. Now, is that a huge amount? Not really, but you know, the difference is there, and that's mainly from the higher compression and the bigger turbo. But again, to kind of recap everything, you know, for the 340i, the chassis was updated a little bit. You get the LCI parts, and overall, I honestly think the B58 is a better engine. And the reason I think that is because it has the closed deck, it has forged crankshaft, forged piston rods, has the air to water intercooler, and I just think that is a better recipe for more power and, well, more power but also reliable. All things considered, you have a good tune, you take care of your car, you service it, and you put good oil in your car. Now, the N55 is more than capable of making big power, but there are limits. So especially with that engine, you know, right around, you know, 400, 450 horsepower, that engine is kind of where it's at, and you can run it reliably at that power, whereas I've heard the B58, it can run 500 wheel horsepower all day, and it's good. So so that's something to think about. You know, what do you want out of your car? Is it just a fun daily driver, or are you wanting to go for bigger power? So but anyway, guys, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to leave a comment. Please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to bring out videos twice a week. I'm a newer channel, so give me a like, thumbs up, really appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks.